we need to realize that Cleopatra's story is less about her than it is about us. What have you been smoking? We saw in the last video the academic titans at Netflix that thought they could change Cleopatra's history.
I imagine her to have curly hair like me and a similar skin color.
And how, because of their great intellect, they were correcting the rest of the world for the best reasons.
I remember my grandmother saying to me, I don't care what they tell you in school, Cleopatra was black.
Well, it turns out people didn't like that, and the trailer has got consistently worse. Now currently sitting at 27,000 upvotes to 329,000 downvotes at 2.6 million views. And at this point, despite the fact they keep calling it a documentary, even the director herself seems to have just given up on defending this thing at all. Look, why would we come out and prove that our documentary was factually accurate when we can just say anyone that has a problem with it is a massive bigot? With the director bravely speaking out, what bothers you so much about a black Cleopatra? I don't know, love. What bothers you so much about a Greek one? With anything like this, the ones who've got a problem with something aren't the ones that just want something to be as it was through history. Because if you didn't care, you'd keep it the same. You're the one who's actually changing it, putting in a lot of effort. If anybody really has a problem with somebody in this, it's you. Why do you hate Egyptian history so much that you think it needs to be changed, but also are so jealous of it that you just want to feel like you're a part of it? Because Netflix have their rather incredible academics.
I imagine her.
But there are others in the world, like, I'm so sorry about your name, mate, Zahi Hawass. And from the site Arab News, this isn't just a random journalist. He's an Egyptologist, former Minister of the Antiquities of Egypt, Director of Excavations in Giza, has been involved in several important archaeological projects, including leading the search for the tomb of Cleopatra. This is a guy who was involved in the excavations of Egyptian temples and personally found coins with her face on and a number of statues, including one which was made of alabaster, and none of it gives any indication that Netflix is right at all. This isn't a case where two people have an opinion. This is where one person has an opinion and everybody else actually has physical proof of what happened, but none of that actually stops the director, because factual history in her documentary doesn't seem to be what she's interested in at all. And ironically, both of these articles admit it, because he says, I would welcome the opportunity to teach Mrs. Smith about Cleopatra, who was a woman whose achievements and story were sufficiently dramatic not to require politically motivated embellishment, something which the director has now admitted is the driving force behind this documentary. Doing the research, I realized what a political act it would be to see Cleopatra portrayed by a black actress. And it shouldn't be, should it? Because you're not supposed to be making a show which is politically subversive. What you're supposed to be doing is accurately representing history in a documentary. But authenticity doesn't enter into this. In fact, that link links to the previous Variety article of Egyptian academics telling Netflix that they were wrong. And as you go through this article, I think there's one main problem, and it comes from the director's point of view. Because my point of view is, I want a documentary to be accurate. I don't really think that's controversial. But the director's point of view of this comes from such an American perspective, which seems absolutely bizarre when we're talking about Egypt. In fact, Egypt, and the truth of what happened in Egypt, barely seems to enter her thinking at all, apart from when she's going, yeah, it would be funny if I wound him up, wouldn't it? Because she starts her story with something that's probably as true as the Netflix documentary itself. A fortune teller told her that you're not Cleopatra, but somehow you share her story and are connected, which was just a month before she got invited to make the documentary. Now, she did enjoy hearing about Cleopatra as a kid, but for some reason, she just felt the image wasn't right. With that in mind, the trailer makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? It's all about feelings and thoughts.
It's possible.
I imagine her.
I remember my grandmother saying to me,
no one really cares that all of the evidence shows that she wasn't, including all known statues of her. Notice how he's not going some, or this may be controversial. No, all. But no, her new production gave her an opportunity. She could ask questions that no one had asked before, because it's like pondering why 2 + 2 doesn't equal 5. And she could find the answers, which are already well known, and release her from the stranglehold that Hollywood has placed on her image. Which, if you want any kind of American obsession, there you go. Look, the rest of the world is just sitting there getting on with their own business, with their own history, with all of their actual facts and evidence of what their actual culture was like back in the day. But no, apparently the thing that puts a stranglehold on history is Hollywood. Look, we all know that Hollywood has made historical movies where they'll take something like the British have done and just put Americans in there, even if it was before a time the country existed. And the less said about Braveheart, the better. Never play a drinking game with how many times he changes his accent in that movie. It doesn't end well.
But I was making a number of kind of crass generalisations about Americans, though. I don't really believe any of them. And I did it for comic effect.
But the thing which has solidified Cleopatra's image is that she actually existed as a person, and so there is only one right answer about what she was like. And Hollywood isn't putting that restriction on her. History is. And coming from the perspective that it's somehow Hollywood, which is putting a stranglehold on other people's history, is so narrow-minded that you can tell you are fully entrenched in the Hollywood bubble. And you get more of the sort of American cultural way of looking at things, which is weird when we're talking about Egypt. For instance, where she's specifically talking about the idea of her being white is somehow unlikely. And it's like, no, people are saying she's Macedonian Greek. There's a reason why I don't use the term and I use nationalities instead, because it doesn't really make sense around here. I'm not the same as a German, but it doesn't matter. In Hollywood, there's just two groups, apparently. Utterly bizarre. And I think the biggest problem with this is you're just looking at years and generations and going, oh, well, surely after a certain amount of time has passed, then she's definitely going to look how I want her to look. You don't have to ask these questions. Evidence exists of what she looks like. But on to a sentence that I never thought I'd say in my entire life. And I'm not even sure why it really needs to exist here either. Why shouldn't Cleopatra be a melanated sister? I don't know. Maybe for the simple reason that it's not true. And as I said in my first video, if you want to make up some fan fiction and do a drama series about it, I have no problems with it. It's really been done before. I think it's silly to do that. I'd laugh at it, but I don't really have any problems with it. The issue is, you called this a documentary. So why not? Because you're lying to people in a documentary that you're presenting as factual history. And it gets even worse when he says what historians can confirm is that it's more likely that Cleopatra looked more like Adele than Elizabeth Taylor ever did. And I'd love to know which historians you're talking about. Because the guy who literally directs the excavations and led the search for her tomb says not one of the depictions supports the decision of the producers of the series. Not one. Or when we're talking about historians, are those the people in the trailer?
I remember my grandmother saying to me, I don't care what they tell you in school.
Because if Netflix wants some more series, my gran came out with some bangers as well. But no, this director realized the magnitude and the political nature of the job. She thought it was important to get things right, but wanted to tell things with humanism and nuance. So, you know, I realized that in a documentary, it was important to have things be true, but at the same time, maybe we can just find this little grey area where we can lie to people and pretend it's accurate. Maybe that's why they called it a docudrama rather than a documentary. Yeah, docu, so you think it's true, but actually, we're just point blank lying to you. Not one piece of support. And she says again, the HBO series Rome portrayed her as one thing, but where was the outrage then? But when I change her, well, doesn't this strike you as somebody who is deliberately just stirring? Like, I know what I'm doing, I know I'm lying to you, but I just can't wait to see the beehive blow up in reaction to it. That's probably why it's not called a drama. That's why when the BBC did it to British Queens, everyone's just like, oh, not again, it's the BBC doing it. Because when you do that, it's obviously political, it's obvious that you're trolling and trying to annoy people, which is why it doesn't work as well. People just start laughing at you. It was only here, because you called it a documentary, that anyone even in passing took this in good faith. Like, this entire article is in good faith. He doesn't believe you're malicious. He just wants to correct you with the actual facts. Although, if you don't like the casting, don't watch the show, does seem to have miffed him a little bit. As he immediately followed it up, despite calling them falsehoods rather than lies, with things like historical revisionism and cultural appropriation. But I think the interesting thing is he's actually met Mrs. Smith herself when he was head of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, which sounds particularly impressive, when both of them were named part of Times Magazine 100 Men and Women Whose Power, Talent, and Moral Example, which is an interesting thing to link to Jada Smith of all people.
An entanglement?
Yes.
But then again, Time Magazine and their top 100 lists don't exactly have the most distinguished of records. In fact, with their current hit rate, if you're on that list, it probably just means we need to investigate you more. But either way, while he was at the ceremony, he actually invited them to come to Egypt, and 11 years later, in company with most of the members of his family, but not his wife, he did. Now, I'm not going to try and insinuate what she was doing at that time. I wouldn't dare be so uncouth.
An entanglement?
But it is interesting how Jada Pinkett Smith, someone who's so concerned about the stories of Africa, it's really important for her and her daughter to know these stories because there's tons of them. And yet, when she got the actual opportunity to go to Egypt and find out about these stories from an expert who was leading the excavations in the place, somebody who would be able to tell her all about these stories. Well, when she had that opportunity, she just didn't go. I don't know. Doesn't seem like you're that bothered about it to me. But even with this, he describes it as a pity, because then he could have enlightened her on all of the facts. and she wouldn't have needed to have made this show in the first place. In fact, his conclusion seems to be because all of the evidence says that it's not true, even with the depiction of Cleopatra on the facade of the temple at Dendra, which shows her with the goddess Hathor and her child. Yeah, he's the child of Caesar, but is he Caesarian or Caesarian? But either way, names aside, why is the series happening now? Perhaps it's just time to take commercial advantage of the current contention among the African community and where their origins lie. In other words, have they just made it to make money? I don't know, this is Netflix. Could they possibly be lying to people who are actually wrong about history, but playing into their misconceptions deliberately, just purely out of self-interest to make money, despite the fact that they all know they're lying to people? I don't know, do you think that's something a multi-billion-dollar corporation would do? And for my money, from Netflix's point of view, yes. And I'd have absolutely no problem about that. You want to make a show about how the royal family are actually reptiles at the North Pole? Whatever. To me, it's entertainment. It's fun. But it is different when you're positioning something as a historical documentary. You can write your fan theories and your entertainment shows all you want. What would happen if we explored this idea? What would happen if history had gone a different way? How would that change the future? I think these could all be interesting ideas to explore in a TV show that isn't a documentary. I even think the director knows it, that she knows she's reimagining history, that it is an exploration of, well, what if history was different? And she's going from there in the show. What it is fan fiction. So what if I take your history and put me in it? That's why historical accuracy doesn't come into this. It's like, well, why couldn't I be there? You know, it's my fan fiction, I can write whatever I want. As far as I can see, the only reason why it is listed as a documentary is because she realised it would be a political act. It would annoy people, and she enjoys it. In fact, I think she's actually trolling people, especially when she says, I've asked Egyptians to see themselves as Africans, and they're furious at me, and I'm okay with this. You could find that sentence on many a forum post back in the day. Oh, well, you know, I did say this to them and they got incredibly angry. And I'm fine with that. She just drops the documentary on Egypt and watched them all get really angry about it, and she's like, yes, Now, if you were trying to do something that was historically accurate, and then people came out and went, well, this isn't true, you'd actually be embarrassed. You'd try and change it. But if the point was to annoy the academics because you're deliberately wrong, well, then you'd be okay with them being furious. That's not a bug, that's a feature. She's fine with Egyptians saying that she's stealing their history, or saying that they wanted to ruin her career. That's laughable, because she's ruining it herself already. But that all comes from her point of view, because when someone from Cairo told her that Cleopatra was Greek, she thought it was horrific. Why would that be a good thing for you? You're Egyptian. Do you not understand how history works, love? I'm English. The Romans invaded here. The Vikings invaded here. If somebody came along and I went, yeah, well, you know, he wasn't Roman though, if it was factually untrue, it would be a stupid statement. I think the biggest statement is why, in this director's opinion, does somebody have to be just like them to count? The Romans are part of English history. No amount of Hollywood shows is going to change that. And it's also not something to make moral judgments over. The Romans being part of English history isn't a good or a bad thing. It just happened. And you could rant and rave all day that actually the Romans weren't in England, but you'd just be lying. You'd be making your own little delusional fantasy land and then finding it weird when the rest of the world went, but you're having hallucinations, dear. In fact, the most bizarre thing about her comments is that she actually doesn't seem to care about what actually happens in the world. It seems like she's saying that as long as she can perceive something, that's as good as reality. And that if we all just get together and believe that Cleopatra is different, then that would be a good thing. And the most bizarre comment you can make about a documentary is, most of all, we need to realize that Cleopatra's story is less about her than it is about us. What have you been smoking? How can you make a documentary about a person and then going, well, the most important thing about the documentary is it's not about her at all, it's about me. This is what I mean about how Hollywood is just so egotistical and self-absorbed. You managed to make Cleopatra about you. That's why it's like, well, wouldn't it be better if Cleopatra just looked like me? Because that's who you think this show is about. We need to liberate our imaginations, not in a documentary about history, and boldly go where no man has gone before to explore our historical figures without fearing the complexity that... There is no complexity. Somebody existed and only one reality happened. We're not in a Marvel multiverse. I'm proud to stand with Cleopatra. A reimagined Cleopatra, and there we go. The acknowledgement that she lied about, actually, I'm not taking Cleopatra from history, I'm imagining a different one. That's why it was in the Netflix trailer. That's why the comments even got away with it in the first place. Well, I can imagine she looked like this. I still think she was a Ferrari F430 that flew through space. Prove me wrong. And yeah, this guy already has proof she's not a Ferrari F430, but the director doesn't care about that, so why should I? And the Egyptians have massive amounts of evidence with actual drawings of her and sculptures of her, because luckily for historians and archaeologists, the ancient Egyptian artists were sticklers for detail. The faces and characteristics of each of the figures are clearly shown, to the point where people are clearly identifiable. And he's like me, he doesn't mind the show being made because a dialogue between all of us is very important. It just shouldn't have the title documentary. It is you documenting the facts, putting them down. There is no room for you to just reimagine your own fan fiction in it. I mean, yes, some shows will put inspired by true events, and then have like a jumbo jet flying through medieval England. But for a documentary, you do expect better. That's why people leaving digital watches on their arms in the middle of a Roman invasion are laughed at. Now, he does say he went to a lecture and there are 3 different theories about Egypt as it is and their own opinions. But if you look at the archaeological evidence, it's clear that the pharaonic civilizations, pharaonic, occurred only in Egypt, and that Cleopatra's life was dramatic enough that she didn't need to be reimagined because he's giving her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe this is just a mistake, or maybe she just doesn't know. No, it's more like a self-insert, actually, the more I look at it. Like, why couldn't I have actually ruled Egypt? Because Cleopatra took the throne, Egypt was severely damaged, significantly in debt, and had high inflation. Seriously, if you wanted that to be your story, you didn't have to go all the way back to Egypt, love. You could have just written a contemporary piece now. Turns out the situation in Egypt is remarkably similar to 2023. And he has one of the best, most classy descriptors for it I've ever seen. Cleopatra rose to the occasion, entered the political arena, and had feminine charms that she did not hesitate to exploit, as witnessed by her relationships with and manipulation of Caesar. She was an academic, science and philosophy. She was a pioneer in the field of women's rights, and I'm like, well, she's queen. What more does she want? You would have thought if you could become a pharaoh or a queen, you'd be like, okay, yeah, maybe there is no glass ceiling. And if you did have a problem with any of it, you're the one in charge. You could just change it. So I'm not even sure what problems you could actually have. But this could be an interesting show, and all you had to do was tell the actual story of her. But he says Cleopatra was many things and well deserving of having her story told to modern audiences. But one thing she most definitely was, well, she wasn't this director. She wouldn't have wanted to be a political tool used, as far as I can tell from your own words, because you wanted to liberate history with your imagination. To reimagine history into something it wasn't, make all of history look just like you so you could feel a part of it, and free history with your imagining from the stranglehold that Hollywood has placed on history, all the while calling it a documentary because you think it gives your Fantasyland more weight. But don't worry, a fortune teller told her something, and she probably saw it in the moons of Jupiter orbiting Uranus, so I think we're all safe there. I mean, hey, look, if the alignment of the planets told you to do it, who am I to argue? But to me, I think it's interesting how when it came out, everyone went, that's stupid, that's factually wrong, what are you doing? And then actually when the director speaks out about it, she's like, yeah, no, I'm reimagining history and then calling it fact. Honestly, for a rebuttal, I didn't expect this. Although I did expect her to come out and just start basically calling everyone bigots, which is weird considering she's the one who has a problem with Cleopatra being what she was. And for me, I always find it interesting. It's the argument of, why do you care so much if we change your history? It doesn't matter. It's like, well, if it doesn't matter, why are you putting so much effort into changing it? And you can't have it both ways. Either it's not important, in which case just leave it where it is, why are you putting so much effort into changing it? Or it's really important what someone is, in which case you definitely shouldn't change it, because then you are taking something important away from somebody. It's not actually an argument where either side goes to, I want to change it. And all of those arguments are defeated by one simple reality, that when you make a documentary, it's your duty to tell the truth. But those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you like the video. Subscribe. More videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.